This is the Quantum Biology Podcast, where we break down the practical health applications of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us.
In this episode, we speak with Dr. Alexander Wunsch, a physician, chronobiologist, researcher, and professor. Based in Heidelberg, Germany, he is known as the Light Doctor, and he has for decades been one of the world's top researchers and teachers on the effects, both good and bad, of light on our human biology. From light bulbs to sunshine, he tells us everything in this fantastic episode.
So, Dr. Wunsch, for people who are new to the idea of light and health, I know for many years, the only time I thought about circadian rhythm was when I was traveling overseas and became jet lagged. Other than that, it was not a topic that I spent any time thinking about. How would you explain to somebody who is in that situation the importance of circadian rhythm to our health?
I would probably start with bacteria or algae and try to explain that even the bacterium has to attune the inner clock to the solar cycle, to the cycle of sunlight and nighttime, to the light or bright conditions and darkness. Since our planet spins in 24 hours, it is essential for every creature which is not living in the depths of the ocean, but exposed to sunlight during daytime, to adapt themselves to this naturally given cycle. So this is nothing new. The opposite is true. It's one of the eldest facts which have been given by our universe, by our cosmos, and it only was possible to come into life, to produce a metabolism to live, was only possible after being able to adapt to the bright daytime and dark nighttime cycles. When you think about a plant, for example, the plant which knows that the sun comes up at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock, whenever, and can prepare the metabolism to that sunrise, this plant will do a much better job. And the same is true on another level, on a different level, for every creature and, of course, also for humans.
I muted myself. What happens when we disrupt those rhythms, as we do with artificial light, especially in the nighttime?
A lot of things might happen. The attunement and the co-working, the synchronizing mechanisms in our metabolism. When you think about the clockwork, every single wheel is attached to the other and linked to any other wheel directly or indirectly. And if you disrupt this chain of different reactions, then you need at least much more energy to maintain the function, to take care of all the tasks. And when you think about just the fact that you have about 100,000 chemical reactions per second in each single body cell, you can imagine that this is the start of a logistic task which starts within each single cell, but is also linked to the cellular systems, to our whole organism. And to bring this into synchrony is crucial for saving energy, saving channels for informational tasks, and so on and so on. So, yeah, you could point out any aspect of our metabolistic activities, for example, and you could be able to tell that it has an impact. But if you want to have some more specific answers, we could go into this, of course, quite easily. But instead of me talking and talking and talking, I will give you the chance to interrupt and adapt your question and specify what I should explain on this. Again, the micro.
Are there any health conditions that have become, well, there are many chronic health conditions that have become much more common in the last, decade or two. Are there any that you see as being very specifically correlated with disruption in our natural light cycles?
I would say almost every chronic disorder or chronic condition can be linked, more or less directly linked, to chronobiological disruption. I think what we would call civilization-associated disorders or diseases, they are all linked to bad habits with regard to lighting and light exposure.
And so that has led you to the study of photobiology. Could you explain what is happening? I think, most people understand that a plant is not going to thrive if you put it in the wrong light environment. However, for some reason, we have not carried that over when it comes to humans. So could you explain what happens with human biology when we are exposed to the sunlight, which we were made to be under?
First of all, I would like to emphasize that if you have a kind of robust organism, and we can talk about the human organism as a robust organism compared to plants, for example, when we are talking about light dependency. The plant will not thrive without light because the plant depends on the generation of energy by transforming light photons into metabolic energy. Photosynthesis would be the key word here. So there is a direct dependency, and humans have evolved on the basis of plants. So we could free ourselves in our behavior in many different ways, and not it has a reason why humans are dominating the planet at the moment. This is because we have so many degrees of freedom, also with regard to our dependence of light. So we can live in darkness, and other creatures like horses, for example, they could work down in the mountains and for years, for example, without showing direct disorders. But this is the problem. On the other hand, if you talk about plants, you immediately will learn that they will not thrive if there is no light. And our higher degree of freedom is also a challenge, because some of us seem to think we are not dependent on any lighting condition, because we can live in darkness, but we will not thrive in a way our metabolism will not work optimally if we are not submitted to this light-dark cycle. And nowadays, when we talk about sunlight, there are two opposite positions. One would say you have to cover yourself and shield yourself from every ray coming from the sun. And on the other hand, the opposite position would be take as many light as possible, as much sunlight as possible. I think both positions are not correct, because as always, the truth lies in the golden middle between these two extremes. And when we ask ourselves, are humans nocturnal creatures or diurnal creatures? This would be the first question. If you can answer this question in one or the other way, you get a better answer to the question, what importance does the sunlight have for our well-being, for our health?
So the spectrum of the sun, when it interacts with our biology, what is happening?
The sunlight itself is not responsible for the beneficial effects in the first go. I would look at it from the other side. Sunlight is a kind of natural constant, which has been there before the first living creature had evolved in the past. And so the spectral composition of sunlight did not significantly change over the last billion years. And this is the main feature, is this constant spectral energy distribution gave birth to life itself and enabled all creatures exposed to sunlight over the millions and millions of years to adapt themselves as optimally as possible to this exact spectral distribution. And the spectral distribution is modulated by, for example, climate. It's modulated by the seasons. It's modulated, of course, by the rotation of Earth with regards to day and night cycle. And these time-associated patterns are light-associated. And our organism has learned during the course of evolution to adapt itself optimally to this spectral distribution, which means if we have a short day and a long night, our organism learned it must be winter. And for the opposite condition, if there is a long day and a short night, it must be summer. And the elevation angle of the sun during winter time differs significantly from the elevation angle during summertime. And this has the highest impact on the amount of ultraviolet B radiation, which is the part in the spectrum giving us the sunburn on one hand, but vitamin D on the other hand. And vitamin D is not some medical wonder potion in a way. It is a substance produced in our skin to adjust all the rest of the body cells which are not exposed directly to sunlight to the solar condition of high concentration of UVB, which means summer, as one example. And what is the consequence if we have 12 or even 16 hours of solar exposure during summertime, depending on where in the world you are located at? The body has to know. And the body not only has to know by seeing the light, the body has to adjust to the consequences of constant incident sunlight. For example, has to save water, has to keep water inside, in order to enable the organism to sweat. If you have no sweat, if you have no water for sweating available, your organism will overheat. It's just that simple. So all the adaptation processes which happen under the hood are not mentally understood by any human. It is a kind of automatic. You don't have to think about the gear you're driving in. Your organism, the vegetative system, takes care of that. But the vegetative system, in order to balance parasympathetic and sympathetic activities, has to know what's going on in our environment. And the most important factor in the environment is, let's say, oxygen is probably more important. But for the optimal attunement of our vegetative system, light has the highest value, or almost the highest importance. And this is the reason why we do not only evaluate light visually, but also via non-visual pathways. And these non-visual pathways can be found within our eye, in the retina, starting evaluating the content of blue. But we also have signaling pathways starting in the skin. And here we not only have hormones or precursors for hormones like the vitamin D. There is also a signaling pathway with regard to stress hormones, which goes along with the signals coming from the eye. And we also have nervous signals coming from the skin, coming from the heat, for example, which evolves when sunlight acts upon skin, and so on. So we have multiple pathways, multiple channels which feed the information into our integration system in the brain, in the vegetative system, in order to take care that all the automatic processes would act as they optimally should.
Thank you. This is such fascinating work. How do you see your work being applied to practical health choices? And do you see your work starting to be implemented by family physicians and preventative medicine practitioners?
I think in integrative or complementary medicine, it's not so far apart from. They are already on the kind of similar wavelengths. Naturopaths naturally have a better understanding of the importance of living close to nature. I think the problem at the moment is more that the school medicine on one hand, but also the standardizing bodies, the governmental bodies, that they are living in a world which is 30 years up to 50 years behind. And I think this is the biggest problem with regards to light. And here we have to discriminate between natural light on one hand, like sunlight. You can tell from these precautious instructions that you should not go into the sunlight. This comes from the old world, from the last century in a way, but from the second half of the last century, because in the first half of the 20th century, sunlight was almost the most important biophysical means to cure diseases of darkness. But then with the rise of antibiotics, this kind of changed. And I think every person who wants to live kind of natural life with less medication, with less artificial environment, they for sure will understand that it's important to behave correctly with regard to sunlight. But what's probably even more important is that most humans in the Western industrialized societies don't even have the chance to get the right dose of sunlight on a regular basis, because they are locked into very artificial conditions. To make a contrasted expression for it, many of us live like stable rabbits, because their time frame doesn't even give them the chance to go out into the sunlight at high noon, for example, for just 20 minutes, because they have no chance to undress and to expose large parts of their body to the sunlight when it's there. So they are exposed to artificial light sources instead, and this on a quite constant basis. I think 90% of people living indoors are exposed to artificial light and are living indoors 90% of their lifetime. And so the impact of the artificial light sources, I would say, is even more problematic. And we have a kind of, we can say that the fact is we have not enough true, unfiltered, natural sunlight. And on the other hand, we have much too much cold, artificial light surrogates, artificial light, overdose of artificial light, and almost no exposure to unfiltered natural light. And this makes the problems.
Yes, absolutely. And many of the people in our community so we approach it, there's two pieces. The first piece is, how do I structure my life so I'm spending more time outside? And then the second piece is, how do I manage my indoor environment so that when I am inside, I'm reducing a level of harm that I'm causing myself by the lights that I choose. So for the first part, for example, I'm Canadian, but we're living in the US, so I'm familiar with the guidelines here, which basically, as you say, are any exposure to the sun is bad. Don't go out, wear sunscreen every time you leave the house. So I'm curious, if it was up to you, if the American Medical Association had a complete breakthrough and realized they needed to change these guidelines and they asked you to write them, what would your recommendation be?
Maybe what first came to my mind is to change the recipe for producing suntan lotion or solar protection lotions, because the composition is based on the assumption that the bad part in sunlight is the short wavelength part, the UVB radiation. So they filter out almost all the UVB and let pass through the UVA radiation. I personally think that the UVA radiation is mainly responsible for all the negative aspects of sunlight exposure. But 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, the scientists, the photobiologists, worked under the assumption that UVA is harmless and the bad part is UVB. When you look, and so the recipe for solar protection creams and lotions, for example, takes this into account and filters 3 times more efficiently in the UVB part compared to the UVA part. So UVA may pass through this filter and UVB will be blocked. This means that you have a kind of spectral change in sunlight. The photoprotection filters change the positive sunlight into something negative. You will not experience a sunburn, but you still get, throughout a day of 8 hours exposed to sunlight, an overdose of UVA. This overdose will not be felt instantly. You will feel it years and decades after exposure, in terms of skin aging, in terms of the development of precancerous cells on the skin, actinic keratosis, and even the white skin cancer types. And the same applies, by the way, to the filtering properties of windows in your house, windows in your car. So I think what should be changed is the unfelt UVA overdosage. And this can only be changed by influencing the regulatory bodies, the Standard Institute for Standards, and so on, the communities which give out recommendations. So you have no influence on the spectral transmission of window glasses until someone regulates it in a way that the new kind of thinking leads to property changes in new products. This applies to windows, this applies to suntan lotions, this also applies to to the recommendations how to deal with sunlight. For example, when you don't experience that an overdose gives you sunburn, you will never learn that sunlight is not only positive. And I saw too many biohackers which looked like I don't get the word. They are read like whatever. They have been warning signs for overdosing the sun because they did not learn how to get the right dose. And this is the problem, that what we learn from science, if you are exposed on a constant basis on the right dosage level, sunlight is positive. And if you are intermittently exposed in terms of overdosing every 7 days or 10 days or so, then sunlight will unfold its nasty properties, but not immediately, but 10, 20, 30 years later. So you can't change it anymore. You cannot adapt anymore. And so, yeah, this would be, I would change the recommendations in terms of not thinking that people are too stupid to understand how to do it correctly. And I would change the composition for sunlight protection preparations, and I would change the spectral transmissions of window glass. These were the 3 immediate actions I'd recommend.
This is amazing. So what I'm understanding is sunscreen, it's not that it's just unnecessary, but it could actually be making things worse. And that our body, when we start to turn red, we go in the sun and we start to feel like we're burning, that's our body saying, okay, we've had enough, go in the shade now. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I was not talking about the finer details, because what is actually preferred by the consumers are sunscreen preparations which are absorbed by the skin. So the sunscreens, the chemical compounds, they are absorbed, and the way they detoxify the problematic solar radiation is absorbing it in the chemical molecule, but these chemicals, they produce reactive oxygen species. And they produce these reactive oxygen species in a way that you have 10 to 100, almost 100 times more reactive oxygen species in the skin compared to the concentrations you would have being protected by your body produced melanin. If we compare the photoprotection properties of melanin and the best chemical photoprotectors, then we can tell that melanin filters or absorbs 99.9% of the radiation and producing just 1/100th of the concentration of reactive oxygen species compared to the best chemical compounds we have available. So wearing suntan lotion normally means that you have massively increased reactive oxygen species production in your skin. There are mineral-based solar protection substances which act like a mirror by reflecting the radiation. These are much, much better when you need the protection. But from the cosmetic standpoint, people think, oh, I don't want to look whitish, so it looks much better when I have something which is absorbed by the skin and I don't have this kind of whitish glow. So if you're going for the cosmetically optimal substance, you will additionally damage your antioxidative system, because you will overload the system, which is not able to detoxify the oxidants generated by sunlight. And I would not, by the way, say that we don't need any preparations protecting us from sunlight, because so many people are traveling all around the world and moving in a way that they expose themselves to environmental conditions they are not made for. And it's still better to not experience a sunburn compared to having a heavy sunburn, because the sunburn itself, it's really a very problematic condition. But on the other hand, it will teach you that the sunlight has to be dosed optimally in order to benefit from its properties.
Right. So you mentioned the biohackers, and there are definitely people that I have come across who have moved to a tropical part of the world and spend most of their time in the sun all day long. So are you saying that we need to be measured in our approach and adapt our sun exposure to our ancestral lineage in terms of what, the amount of melanin in our skin and things like that? And that being, even if you're not burned, but you're just like chronically super tanned, is that a problem?
This for depending on your genetic set, it might definitely become a problem. The problem with recommendations how to deal with sunlight is that you have to give these recommendations on a highly individualized basis, and to give a substantialized recommendation, you not only have to know the skin type, you have to know the genetic composition for certain, for example, for the melanin. We have at least two types of melanin, the pheomelanin and the eumelanin. The eumelanin is the black or brown, gives you a brownish skin color, and the pheomelanin gives you a reddish skin color. So this is a genetic variation, this pheomelanin, found in the Celtic type, found in the fair skin color types, and it's a photosensitizer by itself, while the eumelanin protects you from reactive oxygen species. The pheomelanin produces additional reactive oxygen species in the skin. So if someone, I think that most people have no idea about their about the ratio between eumelanin and pheomelanin in their skin, because you can have a brownish skin color or olive-like skin color, and still you could have a significant amount of pheomelanin in your skin, which is just invisible because the hue of the eumelanin is so much stronger compared to the color of the more faded color of the pheomelanin. And so as long as you don't know this ratio, you have no idea how much unnecessary reactive oxygen species are produced during sun exposure. And so this is the problem, that you cannot tell from the skin type, you cannot tell from the visual information you can get how this ratio is in an individual person. And so the only way is to find out on an individual basis what is the optimal concentration or exposure time for sunlight. And this depends also on the local weather conditions. For example, if you are in a place where you don't have on a regular basis sunlight each and every day, it makes it almost impossible to find out what the correct doses could be. Because for example, what we can refer to are the heliotherapeutically working doctors in the Swiss Alps in the first 3 or 4 decades in the 20th century. And Rollier, for example, he was the master of heliotherapy. And the recommendation he gave was to start with 5 minutes for the feet. And then next day, 5 minutes for the feet, and then pull up the towel up to your knees, so that the feet will have 2 times 5 minutes, and the area below your knees would have 5 minutes. And so he would pull up the towel every 5 minutes each day, exposing the feet at the 3rd day for 15 minutes in total, the 4th day for 20 minutes, but going up step by step, so that you would gradually increase the dose, taking into account that the different areas of the body also exhibit a different sensitivity to sunlight. So he was very, very careful. Once you have a good tan, once you could build up a good tan without using suntan lotion, then it's almost impossible to experience a sunburn. So after 3 weeks of highly controlled sun exposure, you can stay out in the sun all day long without the risk of experiencing a sunburn. But if someone with the skin type 1, with the Celtic skin type, when you look at this person like that, equipped with almost only pheomelanin, this person will not achieve this dark tan which protects the person. So if such a person has to stay outside, for persons like this, we need ways to protect them. Clothing is for sure the best, the optimal protection, but there are situations where you cannot wear clothing all over. And for these situations, it's good to have proper protection possibilities which can be applied in a way like a cream or like a lotion. A trip on a boat trip without the chance to adapt the weeks before, just as an example, or skiing, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, our family has been adapting to the sun over the last few years, and we learned the hard way that we needed zinc when we went skiing. We did one day without it, and we thought quite badly burned because we had been in Mexico and we didn't use sunscreen. But when we started to feel a bit that prickly heat, we would go in the shade, and we just slowly tanned. We did not burn at all. But then one morning skiing without protection, and our skin was peeling off.
Yeah, this is the hard way, but normally you would pass this information on in your family, and once you experience this as an adult, you would protect your kids and so on. But this knowledge it just got lost when you give out the information sun is bad. People will lose their specific knowledge they collected over over generations, and this is where we are at the moment, in a way.
Yes, and so in our experimenting to get back under the sun, it's possible we're overdoing it at times. Just one brief question. I heard you speak about halogen light bulbs as being your preferred indoor light bulb. Could you say a little bit about that, and in terms of the best choice to light our homes?
So the reason why I prefer halogen light bulbs, I would say light bulbs in general, true light bulbs which produce the light via heat, are the best artificial light source, because they produce a natural spectral distribution. And we are adapted, our bodies are adapted to so-called thermal light sources, to light sources where the light is generated by the heat, which accompanies the light. So this is true for sunlight, this is also true for fire, and this is true for everything, for every light source based on this principle, which lies in between with regards to the color temperature. And here, the heat and the temperature has led to the expression, to the term of color temperature. We talk about the color temperature of 5,000 Kelvin or 6,000 Kelvin for sunlight, and we talk about the color temperature of 1,800 Kelvin for fire, as an example. And the light bulb, the Edison light bulb with the tungsten filament inside, has a color temperature of 2,700 Kelvin, and the halogen, the typical halogen light bulb, would go up to 3,000 or 3,200 Kelvin. And in this spectrum between 1,800 and 5,500 Kelvin, this, as long as the light source exhibits a true heat, then our body can optimally adapt to this kind of light. The body will be warned in cases of overdosage by the accompanying heat, in order not to overdose it. And no one can tell, I didn't know that sunlight was there. When you are outside and you feel the heat, you get an idea that something's there. And when you come too close to a light source, to a light bulb inside, you are prone to overdosage as well. So this is the safety property, that the heat warns our body on a subconscious level in case of overdosage. This is the one thing. We are optimally adapted. And why do I recommend the halogen lamp? because you can operate the halogen lamp on direct current, and direct current will lead to zero flicker. If you operate the light bulb at 110 volts or 115 volts, which is the common voltage in the United States, then you have the 60 hertz cycle of sine waves, which transmit their cyclic frequency pattern to the light bulb. So the light bulb operated on alternating current will carry an unnecessary additional information in terms of the 60 hertz, which means the light bulb flickers or pulsates 120 times per second. It's too fast for our eyes to realize, but the stroboscopic lines on a turntable in former times would give you a kind of standing still impression of these strips. So with certain measuring tools in one or the other way, you can demonstrate that alternating current driven light carries this flickering property. And I was aware of this problem with flickering light since many years. I was annoyed by the tubes in the classroom, for example. In the first 4 years in my school, we still had incandescent light, and then when I changed school, we suddenly had this fluorescent light from these tubes, and I felt constantly annoyed by this flicker, because personally I am sensitive to it. Other people are not, and some can adapt to it. So in a way, it is a learning process. Maybe it's also a learning process to filter out the awareness, but this was never my interest. I always wanted to make it even clearer. So I built myself tools to measure it and to demonstrate it as well. For example, a tool which transforms the flicker into an annoying sound. And if you suddenly realize that the light source, your computer screen or your light bulb, gives a constant buzz, and you can hear it, you immediately will say, no, I don't want to have a light source which is giving me a buzz. If I can choose between the buzzing, annoying thing, or a light source which gives just a very subtle white noise. And when you direct this measuring tool to sunlight, you will hear the same subtle white noise, because sunlight produces the subtle and mellow white noise. The candle flame will produce this very subtle noise, and an incandescent lamp, a halogen lamp driven on a clean DC power supply, behaves exactly the same. And so even if someone has no idea about the physiology, about the physics behind it, if you just can listen to the different light sources, how they sound, by a direct transposition of the flicker into audible signals, the decision is just simple and easy, and a small kid can discriminate there is a difference in quality between this and that. And so, yeah, this is what I can recommend. Take for example, your smartphone on with the video setting, and once you see any kind of discontinuity in the picture, kind of flicker, this is a sign that you're operating the light source under conditions which give you another artificial informational part which is not necessary for providing optimal visual conditions. It is caused by the idea of the industry to make it even a little bit cheaper, the product they are selling to you. So from the technical standpoint, we are able today to produce flicker-free artificial light sources. And this is, for example, one aspect, one parameter where I can say I was pointing this out 30 years and 20 years ago already, and the lighting industry just ignored it or asked for proof or whatever. But in the meantime, some Chinese companies, some from the East, from the Far East, they just did it. While the European companies, they were still fighting for their old standpoint. Flicker, we have no proof that it's a problem, so we can go on like we always did. And some of the engineers in the Far East, they picked up the information somehow, and they started to produce flicker-free lights or artificial light sources. So even some of the LEDs are flicker-free. The problem is that the normal person has no means to find out which one is the good one, which one is the bad one. So if you have a good, clean DC source with 12 volts and a halogen lamp, a low voltage halogen lamp with 12 volts driven on DC, you can be absolutely sure that you are on the safe side.
Thank you. That is incredibly helpful. And so they don't advertise that it's flicker free. You'd have to just figure it out by videoing it with your phone and seeing if it has the.
You see, some advertise with the term flicker free, but when you measure it, you find out they have another idea of flicker free. They mean it's reduced in flicker, but it's not flicker free, depending on the way you are measuring it. The lighting industry has devices which integrate the signal in a way and transform the signal, and then they have their mathematical terms and definitions and limits which are changing from year to year and so on. So they come to the conclusion their instrument says it's flicker free. When I transform the light modulation into the audible sound and I still hear a buzz, I have to say, no, it's not flicker free. It might be flicker reduced, but it's not flicker free. And the industry is still fighting for the limits which give them the chance to make their products, again, a little bit cheaper, but a lot worse.
Thank you. I know you have to run. Is there any last words you want to share? Is there any research you're excited about or things that you're thinking about lately that you would want to just quickly share before we hang up?
I came across a paper from Zimmerman and Reiter, which deals with melatonin, with this hormone of darkness. but it's a, I think, 21 pages long paper. When I read it, I thought, wow, he is kind of proving things by referencing them, which I felt 20 years ago and found some proof over the years. It's exactly what I was talking about in the last 25 years. And it highlights the importance of near-infrared radiation. And it gives a completely different and new view upon melatonin and the role of melatonin inside each single body cell, because it is produced not only during nighttime, but also during daytime in each single body cell, but it doesn't even reach the bloodstream, so you can't measure it. So our ideas of melatonin have to be revisited under the latest findings. And a very good overview you will find in this article about the optics of the human body from Zimmerman and Reiter. And this is something I would highly recommend.
Thank you so much. I actually have had people asking me for papers on non-local melatonin. And so that is extremely, extremely helpful. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, Meredith, for
really appreciate it.
asking pleasant questions.
Thank you. And do you teach classes on these topics, or do you just work with students on their dissertation?
I did work with students until 2 years ago, but I kind of retired. Okay. But I'm pondering on the idea to maybe create an e-learning or blended learning course. Yeah. But it's premature at the moment. But maybe in the future there will something available.
Well, I could bring you a group of students when you're ready to teach.
Oh, right? I will.
Our community is really, it's a lot of health practitioners, and they're very keen to find ways to have this information in a curriculum that they can move through. And feel, because right now it's all a self-study course in this area for practitioners. Academic might be different, but
so yeah. I'll get back to you once I'm ready.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, I will.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.